There was a time when respect for others was the foundation of civil society, when decency meant treating everyone with basic human dignity, regardless of their background. But what happened on Family Feud one winter afternoon in 2024 would become one of the most dramatic moments in game show history. When a contestant crossed every line of acceptable behavior and refused to apologize, Steve Harvey made a decision that had never been made before in the show's entire run. He physically removed a contestant from the stage and banned him from ever returning. Before we explore this extraordinary story about accountability and consequences, if you believe that disrespect should never be tolerated, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful stories every day that remind us why character matters more than competition. Now let me tell you about the day Steve Harvey drew a line in the sand and refused to let anyone cross it. The Family Feud studio was filled with anticipation that cold January afternoon as two families prepared to compete for prize money and the joy of appearing on national television. On one side of the stage stood the Montgomery family from Charleston, South Carolina. Leading them was 35-year-old Trevor Montgomery, a corporate attorney who specialized in hostile takeovers and aggressive litigation. Everything about Trevor suggested a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation and force of personality. He wore an expensive three-piece suit despite the casual nature of the show. His designer watch caught the studio lights with deliberate flash, and his posture communicated superiority rather than friendly competition. Standing with Trevor were his younger brother, his college roommate, and two business associates he had invited to fill out the family roster. They were not a family in the traditional sense, but rather a group assembled specifically to win the competition. Trevor had approached Family Feud the way he approached everything in his professional life, as a conquest to be achieved through strategic planning and ruthless execution. He had spent weeks studying episodes, memorizing common answers, and developing what he considered a foolproof strategy for winning. On the opposite side of the stage stood the Garcia family from El Paso, Texas. They were led by 58-year-old Maria Garcia, a grandmother who worked as a housekeeper at a local hotel. With her stood her husband Ricardo, who worked in construction, their adult daughter Sofia, who taught elementary school, and their teenage grandson Miguel. The Garcia family had applied to Family Feud on a whim after Maria's co-workers at the hotel encouraged her. They had been shocked and delighted when selected, viewing it as a wonderful family adventure rather than a serious competition. The contrast between the two families was immediately apparent to everyone in the studio. The Garcia family radiated warmth and genuine affection for each other. They held hands during the introduction, laughed together at Steve Harvey's jokes, and seemed thrilled simply to be part of the experience. The Montgomery team stood rigid and focused, treating the game show like a business negotiation rather than entertainment. What the audience did not know was the fuller story of Maria Garcia's life. She had immigrated to the United States from Mexico 35 years earlier, crossing the border legally with her husband and their infant daughter. They had arrived with almost nothing, speaking minimal English, and faced the daunting task of building a life in a country that often viewed them with suspicion. Ricardo had found work in construction, taking whatever jobs he could find regardless of how difficult or poorly paid. Maria had worked as a housekeeper, cleaning homes and hotel rooms to help support their small family. Over 3 decades, the Garcia family had built a life through determination and sacrifice. They had never become wealthy. Ricardo still worked construction at 59 years old, his body showing the wear of decades of physical labor. Maria still cleaned hotel rooms, her hands rough from years of harsh cleaning chemicals. But they had achieved something more valuable than financial success. They had raised a daughter who became a teacher, instilling education and service in the next generation. They had created stability where there had been none. They had earned the respect of their community through honesty, hard work, and kindness. Maria took profound pride in her work. She viewed housekeeping not as menial labor, but as honest service that made people's lives better. She took care to do her job with excellence, often going beyond what was required to ensure hotel guests had pleasant stays. Her supervisors valued her reliability and attention to detail. Her coworkers loved her gentle kindness and willingness to help anyone who needed assistance. Maria had built a life of dignity through work that many people dismissed as beneath consideration. Trevor Montgomery, in contrast, had grown up with every advantage. His father was a federal judge, his mother a successful real estate developer. He had attended private schools, graduated from an elite university, and moved seamlessly into a lucrative legal career. He had never known financial struggle or uncertainty. He had never questioned whether he would have enough money for rent or groceries. He had never worked a job that required physical labor or deference to others. His entire life had been characterized by privilege, power, and the expectation that the world would arrange itself according to his preferences. Trevor had developed a worldview shaped by this privileged existence. He believed that success was purely the result of individual merit, that people who struggled financially had only themselves to blame for their circumstances, and that respect was something to be earned through achievement rather than extended to all people as a basic human right. He viewed service workers as interchangeable and largely invisible, people who existed to make his life more convenient, but who deserved no particular consideration or courtesy. When Trevor looked at the Garcia family across the stage, he saw what he considered easy competition: a housekeeper and a construction worker against a Harvard-educated attorney. In his mind, the outcome was predetermined. What Trevor failed to understand was that intelligence, dignity, and worth had nothing to do with income or profession. He was about to learn that lesson in the most public and humiliating way possible. The game began with standard energy and excitement. Steve Harvey introduced both families with his characteristic warmth, making everyone feel welcome and valued. The first question appeared on the board, and both families prepared to compete in the initial face-off round. Steve called one representative from each family to the podium. Trevor Montgomery stepped forward confidently. Maria Garcia walked to her position with a gentle smile, clearly nervous but excited. Steve asked the question, and both contestants placed their hands over the buzzer. Trevor buzzed in first and gave his answer. The board revealed it as the number 3 response. A solid answer, but not the top response. Control passed to Maria, who gave a thoughtful answer that turned out to be the number 1 response. The Garcia family took control of the board. Trevor returned to his family position, visibly annoyed at losing the face-off. His team members could see his irritation, the tightness around his mouth that indicated he was not accustomed to losing at anything. The Garcia family played the round with joy and enthusiasm, consulting each other respectfully and celebrating each correct answer. They successfully completed the round, adding points to their total. Between rounds, Steve Harvey engaged in his traditional conversation with the families. He asked Maria about her work, and she spoke proudly about her 28 years of service at the hotel. She described how much she enjoyed making sure guests felt welcomed and comfortable. Her genuine warmth and kindness were evident in every word. The audience responded with warm applause, appreciating her dignity and work ethic. Steve then turned his attention to Trevor Montgomery. He asked about his legal career, and Trevor launched into a self-aggrandizing description of his accomplishments, his prestigious education, and his impressive income. He spoke with the assumption that everyone listening would be impressed by his success. Steve listened politely, though his expression suggested he was less charmed than Trevor imagined. The second round proceeded with similar results. The Garcia family again took control of the board and successfully completed the round. Their lead was growing, and their joy was infectious. The audience was clearly charming for them, drawn to their genuine warmth and family connection. The Montgomery team, in contrast, was becoming increasingly tense. Trevor's frustration was visible and growing. The third round brought both families back to their positions for a crucial question. Steve announced the question that would determine which family advanced to the final round. The question appeared on the board, and Steve prepared to read it to the families. Before Steve could finish reading the question, Trevor Montgomery interrupted him. He pointed at Maria Garcia and said in a loud, dismissive voice that carried clearly through the studio, "This is ridiculous. How are we losing to a maid? Steve, this woman probably does not even understand half the questions you are asking. She probably just got lucky with those answers." The studio fell into shocked silence. Steve Harvey's expression transformed from friendly host to something much harder and more serious. He stared at Trevor Montgomery with an intensity that made everyone in the studio understand that something significant had just occurred. The line between entertainment and real conflict had been crossed. Steve walked away from his podium and stood directly in front of Trevor Montgomery. When he spoke, his voice was controlled but filled with barely contained anger. "What did you just say about Mrs. Garcia?" Trevor, incredibly, did not recognize the danger he was in. He doubled down on his disrespect. "I am just stating facts, Steve. Look at her. She is a housekeeper. I am an attorney. This game should not even be close. The only reason they are winning is because the questions are too easy. If you asked questions that required actual intelligence, we would be dominating." Maria Garcia stood at her position, her face showing the pain of being publicly humiliated. Her family members moved closer to her, providing support and comfort. Her husband Ricardo's hands were clenched into fists, his face tight with controlled anger. Her daughter Sofia had tears in her eyes. Her grandson Miguel looked confused and hurt, unable to understand why anyone would speak to his beloved grandmother with such contempt. Steve Harvey raised his hand to silence the murmuring audience. He turned to face Maria directly. "Mrs. Garcia, I want you to hear something from me right now. What this man just said about you is not true. It is not true, and it is not acceptable. Your profession does not determine your intelligence or your worth. The work you do matters. The dignity with which you do it matters. And you deserve respect, not because of what you do for a living, but because you are a human being." He turned back to Trevor Montgomery. "Sir, I need you to apologize to Mrs. Garcia right now. What you said was disrespectful, cruel, and completely unacceptable on my stage." Trevor Montgomery made a decision that would define the rest of this story. Instead of apologizing, he laughed. It was a cold, dismissive laugh that conveyed his belief that he had done nothing wrong. Apologize for what? For telling the truth. Steve, come on. We all know that some people are more intelligent than others. Some people go to Harvard Law School, and some people clean toilets for a living. That is just reality. What happened next became one of the most talked about moments in television history. Steve Harvey walked over to the production booth and spoke directly to the producers. His words were picked up by the microphones and broadcast throughout the studio. "Stop the game. Right now. We are done." He walked back to center stage and addressed Trevor Montgomery with absolute authority. "Sir, I have been hosting this show for many years. I have seen thousands of contestants come through here. I have seen people get nervous, make mistakes, say things they regret. But I have never, in all my time hosting Family Feud, encountered someone with as much arrogance and as little basic human decency as you have displayed here today." Trevor tried to interrupt, but Steve cut him off with a sharp gesture. "No, you have talked enough. Now you are going to listen. Mrs. Garcia wakes up every morning and goes to work cleaning hotel rooms. She does work that most people do not want to do, work that requires physical effort and dedication. She does it with pride and excellence. She has built a life for her family through honest labor. She has raised a daughter who became a teacher, contributing to society by educating the next generation. She has earned the respect of her community through decades of service." Steve continued, his voice rising with emotion. "You, sir, may have gone to Harvard Law School. You may make more money than Mrs. Garcia will ever see in her lifetime. But let me tell you something about intelligence and worth. Intelligence is not measured by where you went to school or how much money you make. Worth is not determined by your profession or your bank account. And character, which is what really matters, is revealed by how you treat people who have no power or status or ability to benefit you." The audience erupted in applause, a standing ovation for Steve's defense of Maria Garcia and his repudiation of Trevor's arrogance. Steve raised his hand for silence. He was not finished. "Mrs. Garcia has shown more character in the few minutes she has been on this stage than you have shown in your entire appearance here. She has been gracious, kind, and respectful to everyone. She has celebrated her family's success with genuine joy. She has treated this experience as the gift it is. You, in contrast, have treated this game like it is beneath you, treated your opponents with contempt, and revealed that all your education and professional success have not taught you the most basic lesson of human decency. Steve turned to Trevor with finality in his voice. I am going to give you one more chance to apologize to Mrs. Garcia. If you do so sincerely, we will continue the game. If you refuse, I am going to ask you to leave this stage, and the Garcia family will win by default. For a long moment, Trevor Montgomery stood silent. His team members were urging him to apologize, clearly recognizing that the situation had become disastrous. The entire studio waited to see what he would do, and then Trevor made the worst decision of his life. I am not apologizing for stating facts, he said, his voice defiant. If people cannot handle honesty, that is their problem, not mine. Steve Harvey nodded slowly. All right then. Security, please escort Mr. Montgomery and his team off this stage. They are disqualified from this competition and banned from ever appearing on Family Feud again. Get them out of here. Security guards appeared from the wings. Trevor Montgomery's expression changed from defiance to shock as he realized that Steve Harvey was serious. He tried to protest, claiming he had rights and threatening legal action. Steve's response was calm and definitive. You have the right to leave my stage right now. That is the only right you have in this moment. Go. As Trevor and his team were escorted off the stage, the studio erupted in applause again. This was not celebration of someone's humiliation, but rather relief that justice had been served, that disrespect had consequences, and that someone with power had used it to protect someone vulnerable. Steve Harvey walked over to Maria Garcia, who was crying quietly. He took her hands in his and spoke to her with tremendous gentleness. Mrs. Garcia, I am so sorry that you were subjected to that disrespect on what should have been a joyful day for your family. I want you to know that what happened here today was not about you. It was about him and his character. Or rather, his lack of character. Maria looked up at Steve through her tears. Thank you for defending me. No one has ever done something like that for me before. Steve's own eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Garcia, you should be defended every single day. The work you do matters. The life you have built matters. The example you set for your family and your community matters. And anyone who cannot see that is blind to what truly has value in this world. He turned to address the studio audience and the cameras. The Garcia family wins this game. They won it through their correct answers, their teamwork, and their character. But they also won because they represent what really matters in life. Not money or status or prestigious degrees, but decency, kindness, respect, and the dignity that comes from honest work and loving family. The Garcia family proceeded to Fast Money, where they successfully won the $20,000 prize. But the money, while meaningful, was almost secondary to what had happened on that stage. When the episode aired 6 weeks later, the clip of Steve Harvey defending Maria and ordering Trevor off the stage went viral immediately. Within 72 hours, it had been viewed over 100 million times across social media platforms. The response was overwhelming and almost universally supportive of Steve's actions. Comments flooded in from service workers who had experienced similar disrespect, from people who had been dismissed because of their professions, from those who understood that dignity was not dependent on income or education. The clip became a rallying cry for respect for all workers, regardless of their position in the economic hierarchy. Trevor Montgomery faced immediate and severe consequences for his behavior. Video of his removal from the Family Feud stage spread rapidly online. His law firm received thousands of complaints and negative reviews. Major clients began terminating their contracts, unwilling to be associated with someone who had displayed such profound disrespect on national television. Within 2 weeks of the episode airing, Trevor's law firm asked him to resign. His professional reputation, which he had valued above all else, was destroyed by his own arrogance and cruelty. Trevor attempted to salvage his reputation through a series of public statements and apologies, but they rang hollow and insincere. He claimed he had been misunderstood, that his words had been taken out of context, that he had been under stress. None of these excuses resonated with a public that had watched him refuse multiple opportunities to simply apologize to a kind woman he had insulted. His attempted rehabilitation failed because it was built on excuses rather than genuine remorse and transformation. The Garcia family, in contrast, experienced an outpouring of support that changed their lives in unexpected ways. Maria's hotel received thousands of requests from people who wanted to stay there specifically because she worked there. Guests left generous tips and notes of appreciation. The hotel management, recognizing the positive attention Maria had brought to their business, promoted her to head of housekeeping and significantly increased her salary. Within 3 months of the episode airing, the Garcia family had received enough donations from strangers who had been moved by their story to pay off their mortgage completely. Maria and Ricardo, who had worked their entire lives without ever achieving financial security, were suddenly debt-free for the first time in their adult lives. They used the Family Feud prize money to establish a college fund for their grandson Miguel and to help their daughter Sofia with expenses. But perhaps the most significant impact was cultural rather than financial. The episode sparked a national conversation about respect for service workers, about the dignity of all honest labor, and about the poisonous effects of class-based arrogance. Major news outlets covered the story, not as entertainment gossip, but as a serious examination of American attitudes toward work and worth. Universities used the clip in sociology and ethics courses. Labor organizations referenced it in campaigns for better treatment and compensation of service workers. Steve Harvey established a scholarship fund in Maria Garcia's name, specifically designed to help children of service workers attend college. The scholarship emphasized that academic achievement and potential had nothing to do with parents' professions or income levels. The fund awarded its first scholarship 6 months after the episode aired, providing educational opportunities for 20 students whose parents worked in housekeeping, food service, maintenance, and other service professions. 1 year after the episode, Steve Harvey invited the Garcia family back for a follow-up segment. Maria appeared radiant and confident, no longer the nervous grandmother who had stood on the Family Feud stage 12 months earlier. She spoke eloquently about how Steve's defense of her dignity had changed not just her circumstances, but her understanding of her own worth. She described how for decades she had accepted casual disrespect from some hotel guests as simply part of her job, how she had internalized the message that her work made her less valuable as a person. Steve's very public validation had helped her recognize that those messages were lies. Ricardo spoke about watching his wife be disrespected and feeling helpless to protect her, then watching Steve Harvey step in and defend her with the kind of fierce protectiveness that Ricardo himself had felt but could not express. He described it as one of the most powerful moments of his life, seeing someone with authority and platform use both to stand up for the dignity of a working-class immigrant woman. Sofia, their daughter, shared that the episode had changed how she approached her work as a teacher. She had always valued education, but now she emphasized to her students that intelligence came in many forms, that worth was inherent rather than earned, and that respect was owed to all people regardless of their position in society. She taught her students about their grandmother's experience as an example of both the persistence of class prejudice and the importance of standing against it. Miguel, their grandson, spoke about how his grandmother's moment of viral fame had made him proud of his family's working-class background rather than ashamed of it. He had grown up feeling embarrassed that his grandparents were not professionals like some of his friends' grandparents. After watching millions of people celebrate his grandmother's dignity and Steve Harvey's defense of her, Miguel understood that his family's honest work was something to honor rather than hide. The follow-up segment included video messages from hundreds of service workers around the country who shared how the original episode had impacted them. Housekeepers, janitors, food service workers, maintenance staff, and others in similar professions spoke about how seeing Maria Garcia defended on national television had given them courage to demand respect in their own workplaces. Some had confronted employers about disrespectful treatment. Others had simply held their heads a little higher, reminded that their work had value and dignity regardless of what others thought. 5 years after the episode aired, its impact continued to resonate. The clip remained one of the most watched moments in Family Feud history, regularly resurfacing on social media whenever conversations about work, worth, and respect emerged. It had become a cultural touchstone, referenced in everything from political speeches to workplace training programs about respectful treatment of all employees. Trevor Montgomery had largely disappeared from public view. His legal career never recovered from the reputational damage. He eventually found work at a small firm in a different state, earning a fraction of what he had made before his Family Feud appearance. Some reports suggested he had finally begun genuine work on understanding his own prejudices and arrogance, though whether this represented true transformation or simply adaptation to reduced circumstances remained unclear. Maria Garcia retired from housekeeping at 63, 5 years after her Family Feud appearance. Her retirement party was attended by hundreds of people, including former hotel guests who had traveled to El Paso specifically to honor her. Steve Harvey sent a video message celebrating her decades of service and her grace in the face of disrespect. Maria spent her retirement doing volunteer work, mentoring young immigrants, and speaking at schools about dignity, hard work, and self-worth. 10 years after Steve Harvey ordered Trevor Montgomery off the Family Feud stage, a retrospective documentary examined the episode's lasting cultural impact. The documentary explored how one moment of televised conflict had sparked broader conversations about class, respect, and the value we assign to different types of work. It featured interviews with labor economists, sociologists, and ethicists who discussed how the episode had become shorthand for discussions about treating all workers with dignity. The documentary revealed that several major hotel chains had revised their employee treatment policies in the wake of the episode, implementing zero-tolerance approaches to guest disrespect of staff. Numerous companies had incorporated the clip into diversity and inclusion training, using it to illustrate the real-world consequences of class-based prejudice. The episode had become an educational tool, its reach extending far beyond entertainment into meaningful social impact. In the documentary, Steve Harvey reflected on the decision he made that day to stop the game and remove Trevor from the stage. He explained that he had reached a point where he could no longer remain neutral in the face of cruelty. He described feeling that his platform came with responsibility, that millions of people were watching, and that allowing disrespect to go unchallenged would send a message that such behavior was acceptable. His decision to draw a line had been instinctive, but also deeply considered, based on his own values about human dignity and the example he wanted to set. The documentary's most powerful moment came from an interview with a young woman who had been working as a hotel housekeeper when the episode originally aired. She shared that watching Steve Harvey defend Maria Garcia had given her courage to return to school. She had completed her degree, become a social worker, and now dedicated her career to advocating for the rights of service workers. She credited that single episode with changing the trajectory of her life, showing her that her worth was not determined by her current circumstances. 15 years after the episode, Maria Garcia's story remained powerful and relevant. She had become a symbol of dignity in the face of disrespect, of grace under pressure, and of the inherent worth of all honest labor. Schools named scholarships after her. Community centers displayed her photograph. Labor organizations honored her as an example of the workers they fought to protect and support. The episode had proven that television could be more than entertainment, that game shows could become platforms for addressing serious social issues, and that standing up for what was right mattered more than maintaining comfortable neutrality. Steve Harvey's willingness to stop a game, sacrifice television content, and defend a vulnerable person had created ripples that continued to spread outward for years. As this remarkable story reaches its conclusion, it stands as a testament to the power of using privilege and platform to defend those who are vulnerable, the importance of treating all people with dignity regardless of their profession or status, and the reality that true character is revealed not by credentials or income, but by how we treat those who cannot benefit us in return. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that every person deserves respect regardless of their work or circumstances, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, because in a world that too often measures worth by wealth and status, we need constant reminders that dignity is inherent, that honest work of any kind deserves honor, and that standing up for those who are disrespected is always the right choice. Thank you for watching, and remember that how we treat the most vulnerable among us reveals who we truly are as individuals and as a society.